Welcome to Unit Design 101, where we break down the overall factors that make units useful in Fire Emblem and beyond. Whether you're a ROM hack creator or merely interested in overall design, this resource is for you. This week, it's finally time to talk about Lords, the main character, the only required deployment, and the pros and cons of various ways to design them. We will not be talking about royals or side character lords as found in Fates or Engage. This is strictly speaking about the lone or duo main character. What makes up a lord is actually harder to make one single case for than most other unit types. Instead, lords are spread across a continuum, with a number of factors to consider, including relative strength, weapon type, and promotion. The only true global factor about all lords in Fire Emblem is that they are a mandatory survival condition. If there is no lord, there is no game. Unless you flag other units for mandatory survival like Robin or Chris, the main lord is the only unit the designer can guarantee the player has access to, though any factors about the unit such as training, inventory, or class in a reclassing game are not guaranteed by the developer. This is why it is common to see a final act power-up, with the main lord getting a personal weapon that is very strong against the final boss, sometimes with a powerful promotion or a dedicated training map, to try to ensure that the player has not soft-locked themselves. This is one of the few control valves the developer has in an open-ended game like Fire Emblem. This is the mechanical reasoning as to why, for example, Fire Emblem 1 Marth gets Mercurius and why the Falchion makes him immune to physical weapons, why FE2 Alm gets force promoted and goes through the gauntlet to get his Falchion, or why FE6 Roy gets a promotion and the Binding Blade at the same time, making him strong enough from base to fight endgame enemies. Use that guaranteed deployment to your advantage to make sure that, at least on easier difficulties or single difficulty games, your players can finish the game no matter how their party looks if they get that far. When combined with the late game safety units like Goto or Athos, an endgame power-up guarantees that a player who has invested the time to get to the endgame can finish the game. Promoting based on the story can also be a point of contention, however. It might make sense mechanically for a main lord to be powered up for the final fight, but this also means that they often get passed up by the rest of the army for a significant portion of the game, as everyone else gets to promote and gets their peak performance, while the main lord ends up falling so far behind that their required deployment is seen as more of a liability than an asset. Looking back to the early game, one of the other common factors among lords is that they will have some form of rapier, an early game personal weapon effective against both cavalry and armor units. These are two unit types that are commonly bosses in the early game, and will generally be among the more threatening or annoying enemy types to deal with throughout the early and mid-game. Rapiers also often feature higher hit and crit rates than equivalent strength weapons, encouraging the player to use them as a consistent and powerful option even against foes that they don't deal effective damage against. Games that break this rule either have no rapier equivalent at all, because the lord doesn't particularly need that power, have a personal weapon other than a rapier that's better against the game's particular threats, or make the rapier something that anyone can use, removing the reliance upon a single unit for combat. Players familiar with the Fire Emblem series will likely have a few assumptions for how lords will play and grow, usually gaining high skill and luck with decent speed, but less consistent strength or defense. Any changes to this dynamic are often flagged by a larger change to the unit, to force players out of that headspace. Main weapon type is an easy way to tell the player this unit probably won't work like other lords you're used to. Path of Radiance Ike, Shadow Dragon Marth, Awakening Chrom, Fire Emblem 7 Eliwood, and FE6 Roy all play differently within their game's context, but are talked about far similarly compared to Hector, Ephraim, and Micaiah, whose gameplay differences are far more notable because of their different weapon choices. The traditional Sword Lord has often been criticized as weak, inflexible, or not worth training. This is globally untrue, as sometimes Sword Lords can be among the strongest units in their respective games, but it is a pervasive and convincing narrative among people who have played several games wherein this feels more true. This is less of an issue of the Lord's actual stats or advantages in a vacuum, and more often in relation to the other units alongside them. It's easy to criticize Eliwood's performance when he's sharing the field with both box-ready Marcus and more viable training products like Lowen, especially when they can promote far earlier and gain access to more weapons, higher stats, better stat caps, and more, while he's stuck for the majority of the game at 5 move and a level and stat cap of 20. Late promotion means less in games where stat caps are not meaningfully raised by promotion. Lords like Marth and Leaf feel less like wasted EXP to train compared to lords like Roy or Eliwood because their combat prowess is not capped halfway relative to their peers. Galzus might have near-cap stats, sure, but nothing is mechanically preventing Leaf from approaching or matching his performance because of a 20-point stat cap. Meanwhile, Eliwood will continue to fall farther and farther behind Lowen after he promotes, with Eliwood's late promotion leaving him with unpromoted caps that cannot be exceeded even with every available stat booster. This is not to say that a Lord needs to be the strongest unit in your army to be worth using. There is a real danger in making the Lord so powerful that every other unit is effectively pointless, as both player and designer likely will want a good number of the cast to see active use. Instead, having the Lord serve a unique role, such as Micaiah's healing and magical damage, or Celica's access to monster effective Seraphim magic, can ensure their use in combat without completely overshadowing the rest of your army. There are also valid non-combat roles that Lords can play well, particularly because of their forced deployment. The large number of units Leaf supports allows him to strengthen other units just by being around them, more so when given charm through something like the Kingmaker Sword. Alir's personal skill grants true damage and flat damage reduction to adjacent allies, which can be increased through some bond or emblem ring abilities, and Alir's Engage Plus ability rewards both their own combat as well as using them to boost other units. Whichever direction your main Lord points, make sure it complements the design of your game. If you want a traditional linear narrative with late game power-up, consider the tools your main Lord is given to help the player succeed through using them. If you want a more open-ended play experience, try to design a main Lord that can either lead or support whatever composition the player ends up with. Always be aware of the Lord's relative power to other units, particularly in the mid-game, if you want a story-based promotion or power-up. And don't be afraid to give the Lord something unique that will encourage the player to use them, while also not overshadowing the other units in your game. Thank you so much for watching. A big shout out to Royal Leguzguard member Sal Mellon, and Leguzguard tier members C2 Pikali, Enigmatic Mr. L, The Big Herman 007, Bro Duderman, Kumi, Miss Mesmerism, Lakag, and Relaz6. We are starting to run out of unit types to talk about for Unit Design 101, so if you have any other ideas or want me to follow up on any of them in more detail, let me know in the comments below or in the Discord link in the description. And until next time, this is Mithril Zenith signing out.